The Montana winter of 1847 arrived with teeth. Catherine Mercer woke before sunrise on the 14th of December, her breath forming pale clouds in the darkness of her small cabin. The fire had died overnight, and frost had crept across the single window like lace made of ice. She wrapped her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders and moved toward the door, her fingers stiff with cold as she reached for the latch. When she stepped outside, the world was blue-gray and silent. Snow stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the cluster of rough cabins that made up their settlement. 18 families who'd come west with dreams bigger than their supplies. The nearest real town was 3 days' ride south, and winter had cut them off completely. Catherine's boots crunched through the snow as she made her way toward the well. The air burned her lungs, sharp and clean. Above her, the sky was beginning to lighten, stars fading into the coming dawn. That's when she saw the first one. It stood at the eastern edge of the settlement, perhaps 30 yards from the nearest cabin. A figure made of snow, roughly human-shaped, standing about 6 feet tall. The construction was crude but deliberate. A rounded base, a torso, a head. No arms, no face. Just the basic shape of a person, standing silent and alone in the pale light. Catherine stopped walking. Her heart kicked once, hard against her ribs. She'd heard the whispers, of course. For 3 mornings now, settlers had woken to find these snow figures arranged around the camp, always at the edges, always facing inward, and always gone by sunset, buried beneath fresh mounds of snow that appeared without explanation. "They're watching us," Margaret Thornton had said 2 days ago, her voice thin with fear. "Indian magic. They're marking us for death." But Catherine had seen the figures differently. They didn't feel threatening to her. They felt purposeful, like sentinels, like a message she couldn't yet read. She continued toward the well, her eyes tracking across the settlement's perimeter. 1, 2, 3, 4 more snow figures, each positioned at careful intervals, each facing the cabins. 7 in total this morning. Yesterday there had been 5. Their numbers were increasing. By the time the sun fully rose, the settlement was awake and buzzing with nervous energy. Men gathered near the largest cabin, the one belonging to Samuel Garrett, who'd appointed himself leader through sheer force of will and a loud voice. Catherine could hear them from her doorstep, their words carrying across the frozen air. "It's them, Comanche," Garrett was saying, his breath steaming. "That war chief they call Ironstorm. He's playing with us, trying to spook us into leaving. We should burn them," someone else suggested. "The snow figures. Burn them before they're buried again. And provoke an attack?" Another voice, uncertain. "What if destroying them is what brings the savages down on us?" Catherine turned away, disgusted by their fear and their assumptions. She'd been in this settlement for 6 months, ever since her husband died of fever on the trail west. She had nowhere else to go, no family waiting, no money for passage back east. She was trapped here with these people who saw threats in everything they didn't understand. She spent the morning doing what she always did, tending to small tasks, mending clothes for the few families who could pay her, keeping her head down and her opinions to herself. But her thoughts kept returning to the snow figures, to their strange, silent presence, to the way they appeared overnight, crafted by hands she never saw. It was near noon when young Tommy Brennan came running through the settlement, his face red from cold and excitement. "There's an Indian," he shouted, "on the North Ridge, just standing there watching." The men grabbed rifles and moved toward the edge of camp. Catherine followed, drawn by something she couldn't name. Her heart was beating fast, but not from fear, from anticipation. They gathered at the northern boundary, 20-some people squinting against the snow glare at the ridgeline about 200 yards distant. And there, stark against the white landscape and pale sky, stood a single figure on horseback. Even from this distance, Catherine could see he was Comanche. He sat perfectly still on a paint horse, his posture radiating controlled power. He wore heavy furs against the cold, but his head was bare, long black hair moving slightly in the wind. He held no weapon in his hands, though Catherine had no doubt he was armed. "That's him," Garrett breathed. "Iron Storm, the war chief. He's just watching," someone whispered. "Why don't he attack? Maybe he's counting us, learning our strength." Catherine said nothing. She stood at the edge of the group, her eyes fixed on the distant rider. And as she watched, something strange happened. The war chief turned his head, It was a subtle movement, barely noticeable, but Catherine felt it in her chest like a physical thing, the weight of his gaze finding her among the cluster of settlers. For several long seconds, he looked directly at her, not at the group, at her specifically. She should have been frightened. She should have looked away, retreated to her cabin, hidden herself from whatever threat he represented. But she didn't. She stood still and returned his stare, her hands hanging loose at her sides, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. Then, without warning, he was gone. The war chief wheeled his horse and disappeared over the ridge so quickly it was like he'd never been there at all. "Did you see that?" Margaret clutched her husband's arm. "He was watching us, studying us like prey." But Catherine knew different. The war chief hadn't been watching them. He'd been watching her. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Catherine lay in her narrow bed, blankets pulled to her chin, staring at the dark ceiling of her cabin. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Snow hissed against the walls. She kept seeing his silhouette on that ridge, the stillness of his posture, the way he'd turned his head and found her so easily among all those people. Why her? She wasn't anyone special. A widow with no property, no prospects, no connections. Just another woman trying to survive a brutal winter in a settlement barely clinging to existence. There was nothing about her that should draw the attention of a Comanche war chief. And yet, sometime near midnight she rose and moved to her window. She scraped away the frost with her fingernails and peered out into the darkness. Snow was falling again, thick and steady. She could barely see 10 feet beyond her cabin. But there, at the very edge of her vision, she saw movement. A figure, human-shaped but not human, moving through the falling snow with purpose, heading toward the settlement's eastern edge. Catherine's breath caught. She pressed her face closer to the glass, trying to see more clearly. But the figure was already gone, swallowed by darkness and weather. For a long time she stood there, watching the snow fall, wondering if she'd imagined it, wondering if fear was finally getting to her like it had gotten to everyone else. But when dawn came and she stepped outside into the gray morning light, she saw them immediately. 9 snow figures now, arranged in a half-circle around the settlement's eastern side. And one of them, the one directly in front of her cabin, was different from the others. This one had arms. Crude, yes, but unmistakably arms, reaching forward as though offering something she couldn't see. Catherine walked toward it slowly, her boots sinking deep in the fresh snow. She stopped 3 feet away and studied it carefully. The construction was more detailed than the others, almost deliberate in its craftsmanship. "Miss Mercer?" She turned to see Garrett approaching with 3 other men, all carrying rifles. "Step away from that thing," Garrett ordered. "We're destroying them. All of them. Before sunset." "No," Catherine said quietly. Garrett stopped, his eyebrows lifting. "Excuse me? Don't destroy them," she said, more firmly this time. "They're not a threat. Not a—" Garrett's face reddened. "That savage is marking us for slaughter, woman. These figures are some kind of witchcraft, and we're ending it now." "They're not a threat," Catherine repeated, her voice steady. "They're a message, and destroying them before we understand what they mean would be foolish." "You telling me how to protect this settlement?" "I'm telling you that fear makes people stupid," Catherine said, meeting his eyes, "and stupid decisions get people killed." For a moment, she thought Garrett might strike her. His hand tightened on his rifle, his jaw working. But then he spat in the snow and turned away. "Do what you want," he said over his shoulder. "But when them Comanche come screaming into camp, don't expect us to die protecting you." The men followed him back toward the center of the settlement, leaving Catherine alone with the snow figures. She looked at the one with arms again, reaching forward, offering. "What are you trying to tell me?" she thought. And somewhere in the distance beyond the ridge where he'd stood watching yesterday, she imagined she could feel the war chief's eyes on her still. 3 days passed. The snow figures continued to appear, their numbers growing each morning. 12, 15, 18. They formed a loose perimeter around the settlement, and though the men continued to threaten destruction, no one actually touched them. Fear did that, made people paralyzed even as they talked about action. Catherine spent those days watching, thinking, trying to understand the pattern. The figures were always positioned with care, never random, never haphazard. They faced inward, yes, but not aggressively, more like guardians. And each evening, before sunset, they would be buried beneath fresh snow mounds, deliberately covered, preserved in some way. It was a ritual. She was certain of that now. But what kind of ritual? And why here? Why this settlement? On the fourth morning after she'd first seen Ironstorm on the ridge, Catherine woke to find the settlement in chaos. She dressed quickly and hurried outside to find people gathered near the well, their voices high and frightened. When she pushed through the crowd, she saw why. Someone had left an offering. A deer carcass, freshly killed and field-dressed, lay in the center of the settlement. It hadn't been there when people went to sleep, but now, in the pale dawn light, it was impossible to miss. Meat for hungry people, appearing like a gift from nowhere. "It's poisoned," Margaret insisted. "Has to be. Why else would a savage leave us food?" "Maybe it's a trick," another woman said, "to make us trust him before he attacks." Garrett crouched near the carcass, examining it carefully. "Meat looks fresh, clean kill, no signs of poison that I can see." "So what do we do?" someone asked. "We burn it," Garrett said, standing. "We don't take nothing from them Indians, it's a matter of principle." "Principle doesn't fill empty bellies," Catherine heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped forward, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "Half the children in this camp are going hungry," she continued. "We've been rationing supplies for weeks, and you want to burn fresh meat because of pride?" "It ain't pride," Garrett snapped. "It's survival. We start taking gifts from savages. We start owing them, and I don't owe them nothing." "No one's asking you to owe anyone anything," Catherine said, "but refusing food when we're starving? That's not strength. That's stupidity, masquerading as pride." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Catherine could feel the weight of everyone's stares, some angry, some uncertain, some quietly agreeing with her. Finally, one of the older women spoke up. "She's right. My grandchildren haven't had decent meat in a month. If it's poison, we'll find out quick enough, but if it's not—" She trailed off, her meaning clear. Garrett's jaw worked. He looked around at the assembled settlers reading the room, and Catherine saw the moment he realized he'd lose this fight if he pushed it. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, "but Miss Mercer here will take the first bite, since she's so sure it's safe." Catherine felt her stomach drop, but she couldn't back down now. She walked forward, pulled her knife from her belt, and cut a small piece of meat from the haunch. It was cold, but the flesh was clean and deep red, venison fresh as could be. She brought the raw meat to her mouth. Everyone watched, silent. She bit down, chewed, swallowed. The meat was good, untainted. "Satisfied?" she asked Garrett. He didn't answer, just turned and walked away, shoulders stiff with anger. The settlement butchered the deer that morning. Children ate until their bellies were full for the first time in weeks. And though no one thanked Catherine directly, she felt the subtle shift in how people looked at her, with less dismissal, more consideration. That afternoon, she decided to walk beyond the settlement's edge. It was foolish, probably, dangerous, certainly, but Catherine was tired of cowering behind cabin walls, tired of letting fear dictate every choice. She wrapped herself in her heaviest coat, pulled her hood up, and walked north, toward the ridge where Ironstorm had appeared days earlier. The snow was deep, the going slow. Wind cut across the open plain like knives. But Catherine pressed on, her breath coming hard, her legs burning with effort. She didn't know what she was looking for. Answers, maybe. Understanding. Some explanation for why a Comanche war chief was leaving snow figures and deer carcasses for a settlement of strangers. She'd walked perhaps half a mile when she saw them. Tracks. Fresh horse tracks in the snow, coming from the north and circling east around the settlement's perimeter. She followed them with her eyes, tracking their path, and her breath caught when she realized they came within 50 yards of her own cabin before veering away again. He'd been close, very close, close enough to see her through her window if he'd wanted to. Catherine stood motionless, suddenly aware of how exposed she was out here, miles from any help, alone on an open plain with a war chief who'd been circling the settlement like a wolf studying prey. She should have been terrified, but instead, she felt something else, something that made her skin prickle and her heart race, not with fear, but with recognition. Like her body understood something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. "Why are you watching me?" she said aloud, her voice swallowed by wind and distance. No answer came, just the whistle of wind and the vast, indifferent silence of winter. But when she turned to walk back toward the settlement, she saw something that stopped her cold. Another snow figure, this one built alone, away from the others, positioned on a small rise about 100 yards to her right. And unlike the others, this one was different in a way that made her chest tighten. It had a face. Crude. Yes. Just indentations for eyes, a line for a mouth, but unmistakably a face, turned in her direction, watching where she stood. Catherine's hands were shaking now, but not from cold. She walked toward it slowly, each step deliberate. When she reached the figure, she circled it carefully, studying its construction. The snow had been packed tight, almost lovingly shaped. The details were subtle but present, the suggestion of shoulders, the angle of the head, and at its base, pressed into the snow, was a single handprint, large, male, fresh enough that the edges were still sharp. He'd been here, recently, while she was walking, perhaps. He'd built this figure knowing she would find it, knowing she would understand it was meant for her. Catherine crouched down and, after only a moment's hesitation, pressed her own hand beside his print. Her hand looked small next to his, delicate, feminine. The contrast was stark. She didn't know why she did it. The gesture felt important somehow, like an answer to a question she hadn't fully heard. When she stood, her legs were trembling. She looked around, scanning the horizon for any sign of him, but there was nothing. Just snow and sky and the distant line of mountains. "I see you," she whispered. "I don't understand you yet, but I see you." The wind picked up, swirling snow around her boots, and Catherine turned and walked back toward the settlement, her mind spinning with questions she had no answers for. That night she couldn't sleep again. She sat by her window, wrapped in blankets, watching the darkness beyond the frosted glass. The moon was nearly full, turning the snowscape into something ghostly and beautiful. Around midnight, she saw movement, a figure tall and unmistakably human, moving through the settlement with confident, silent steps. Catherine pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging the view. She wiped it clear frantically and watched as the figure stopped near the eastern edge of camp. It was him. Even in the darkness and distance, she knew it was Ironstorm. He moved like water, like shadow, like something more than human. And he was building another snow figure, his hands working quickly and efficiently. Catherine's heart hammered. She should wake someone, sound an alarm, let the men know a Comanche was inside their perimeter. But she didn't. She just watched, transfixed, as Ironstorm shaped snow into human form with the precision of ritual. When he finished, he stood back, surveying his work. Then slowly, he turned his head, toward her cabin, toward her window. Catherine's breath stopped. Even across the distance, even through darkness and glass, she felt his gaze lock onto hers. It was impossible that he could see her. Her cabin was dark, her window small, but she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that he could see her, that he knew she was watching. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ironstorm raised one hand, not in threat, not in greeting, but in acknowledgement. Simple, clear, "I see you too." And then he was gone, melting into shadow so completely it was like he'd never existed at all. Catherine sat back, her whole body shaking, not from fear, from something far more complicated, far more dangerous. Understanding. He wasn't threatening them. He was communicating. The snow figures, the buried mounds, the deer carcass, all of it was language. A language she was only beginning to comprehend. And somehow, impossibly, she'd become the only person in this settlement who was listening. The settlement began to fracture along lines of fear and faith. Some families, the Brennans, the Hutchinsons, two others, announced they would leave as soon as weather permitted. "We won't wait to be massacred," Thomas Brennan declared, his voice tight with conviction. Others, led by Garrett, insisted on staying, on defending what they'd claimed as theirs. Catherine belonged to neither camp. She simply waited, watched, and wondered. The snow figures now numbered 23. They formed an almost complete circle around the settlement, gaps only where the terrain made placement difficult. And each morning Catherine would walk among them, studying their positions, their orientations, searching for patterns. She noticed things others didn't. The figures near the western edge stood slightly taller. Those on the north side faced a few degrees off-center toward the mountains rather than directly at the cabins. And the one nearest her cabin, the one with arms, had been rebuilt 3 times now, each iteration slightly different. It was maddening, like trying to read a book in a language she almost but didn't quite understand. On the 9th day after the deer carcass appeared, Catherine woke to find something new. A path had been cleared in the snow. Not walked. Cleared deliberately, snow pushed aside to create a narrow trail leading north from the settlement into open territory. It started just beyond her cabin and extended as far as she could see into the gray winter morning. Catherine stood at the beginning of this path, her heart in her throat. The message was unmistakable. Follow. Don't even think about it. She turned to find Margaret Thornton watching her, arms crossed over her chest. Think about what? Catherine asked innocently. Following that trail, Margaret said. It's a trap. You know it's a trap. It's an invitation. To what? Your death? Margaret's voice cracked. Catherine, I know you don't think like the rest of us. I know you see things different, but this is madness. That war chief is playing with us. With you especially. Why me especially? Margaret hesitated, then said quietly, You really don't see it. The way he watches you. The way these figures always appear closest to your cabin. He's marked you, Catherine. Singled you out. For what? I don't know. But nothing good comes from a savage's attention. Catherine wanted to argue, to explain that Ironstorm didn't feel like a threat, that his attention felt like something else entirely. But she had no words for what she sensed. No way to make Margaret or anyone else understand that she felt safer under his watchful gaze than she did surrounded by her own people. So she just nodded and returned to her cabin, leaving the cleared path untouched. But she thought about it all day, about following, about answers, about the weight of being watched by someone who seemed to see her more clearly than anyone ever had. That night, she made a decision. She waited until the settlement was asleep, then dressed in her warmest clothes, packed a small bundle of supplies and slipped out of her cabin. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the darkness almost complete, but the cleared path was visible even in the dark, a ribbon of compressed snow leading into emptiness. Catherine took a breath, said a prayer to a god she wasn't sure she believed in anymore, and started walking. The cold was immediate and brutal. Wind cut through her coat like it wasn't there. Snow crunched under her boots, each step echoing in the silence. She walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, following the path as it curved northeast, away from the settlement and toward rougher terrain. Then the path ended. Not gradually, just stopped, abruptly, in the middle of nowhere. Catherine turned in a slow circle, searching for some indication of what to do next. But there was nothing, just snow and darkness and cold. I followed, she said aloud, her voice small. I'm here. Now what? Silence answered her. Long enough that she began to think this had been foolish after all, that Margaret was right, that she'd walked straight into a trap built of curiosity and naive trust. Then she heard it, a sound so quiet she almost missed it. Breathing. Close. Behind her. Catherine spun, her hand flying to the knife at her belt. And there, less than 10 feet away, stood Ironstorm. He'd appeared without sound, without warning, as if he'd materialized from the darkness itself. In the dim light she could barely make out his features, just the shape of him, tall and broad and radiating controlled power. He wore furs that made his shoulders look massive. His hair hung loose around his face. His eyes caught what little light there was and reflected it back at her. They stared at each other. Catherine's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But she didn't run, didn't scream, just stood her ground and met his gaze. Ironstorm tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then, to her complete shock, he spoke. You came. His voice was deep, accented, but the English was clear. I wasn't certain you would. Catherine's mind reeled. You speak English. I speak many tongues. Yours, mine, others. He took a step closer, and Catherine fought every instinct that screamed at her to retreat. You are the only one who sees. Sees what? The language. Another step. He moved like water, like shadow. They look at my gifts and see threat. You look and see questions. I don't understand your gifts, Catherine admitted. The snowmen, the buried mounds, the deer. I know they mean something, but I can't read them. Not yet. He was closer now. Close enough that she could feel heat radiating from his body in the frozen air. But you will. Why me? Ironstorm was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher. Because you are the only one who is not afraid. I am afraid, Catherine whispered. Right now, I'm terrified. No. He shook his head slightly. You are uncertain, wary, curious, but not afraid. Fear makes the eyes blind. Yours see clearly. He reached out then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Catherine stood frozen as his hand moved toward her face. His fingers, rough warm despite the cold, touched her cheek so gently it felt like a question. "I have watched you," he said quietly. "For weeks I have watched. The way you move through your people but are not of them. The way you stand apart. The way you look at my work with thought instead of panic." Catherine's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Why are you here? Why are you doing this?" Ironstorm's hand dropped away, but he didn't step back. "This land held my people once. Before the snows came wrong. Before the spirits grew angry. My ancestors are buried beneath these plains." He gestured around them. "The snowmen mark their graves. I build them so the spirits remember they are not forgotten. I bury them each night to protect them from disrespect." Understanding crashed over Catherine like cold water. "You're not threatening us. You're honoring your dead." "Yes, but why the deer? Why the cleared path?" "The deer was payment. For your voice. For your defense of my work when your people wanted to destroy it." His eyes held hers. "And the path, that was invitation. To understanding. To truth." "And now what?" Catherine asked. "Now that I'm here? Now that I know?" Ironstorm was silent. Then, "Now you choose." "Choose what?" "Whether to return to your people with this knowledge, or," he trailed off, "or what? Or whether to stay, to learn, to see more than what your people let themselves see." Catherine's breath caught. "Stay? Out here? With you?" "Not forever. Not tonight, but yes. If you wish to truly understand, you must learn to see as I see, and that cannot be done from behind cabin walls." It was insane, dangerous, completely irrational. Everything about this moment screamed that she should run back to the settlement, back to safety and familiarity. But Catherine had been safe and familiar before. She'd been a proper wife in a proper home with a proper life. And it had killed her husband and left her stranded and hollow. "I'll come back," she heard herself say. "Tomorrow night. Same time." Ironstorm nodded once, approval flickering in his dark eyes. "Dress warm. The cold will be worse. And bring nothing that belongs to your people. When you walk with me, you walk between worlds. What if someone follows me? They won't. Simple. Certain. They are too afraid of what lives beyond their walls. Only you are brave enough, or foolish enough to step outside." He turned then, preparing to disappear into darkness. But Catherine called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Wait." He paused, looking back. "What's your real name? Not the one the settlers call you." For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched his features. "No Coney. It means those who turn back, because we never run from what matters." "Catherine," she offered. "It means pure. Though I don't think I've been that in a long time. Purity is overvalued," Noconi said quietly. "Truth is what matters. And you, Catherine who sees clearly, have more truth in you than all your people combined." Then he was gone, vanishing so completely into the darkness that Catherine stood alone, wondering if any of this had been real. But when she looked down, she saw his footprints in the snow, large, recent, leading away into territory she'd never dared explore. Catherine walked back to the settlement slowly, her mind churning. She'd just met alone with a Comanche war chief, agreed to meet him again, crossed lines she couldn't uncross, and the strangest part, she wasn't afraid anymore. The next night, Catherine returned to the place where the path ended. She'd spent the day in a fog of anticipation and doubt, barely speaking to anyone, moving through tasks like a ghost. Twice Margaret tried to pull her aside for conversation, but Catherine deflected each attempt. Some truths were too fragile to speak aloud. When darkness fell, she slipped out again. This time she'd packed differently. No supplies from the settlement, just things she'd owned before arriving. A blanket her mother had made, a small knife her husband gave her years ago, a tin cup that had crossed half a continent in her pack, things that were hers, not theirs. No Coney was waiting when she arrived. He stood in the same place, but this time she could see him better. The moon had emerged from clouds, bathing everything in cold silver light. He looked different without the element of shadow, more human, but no less powerful. "You came," he said, and there was surprise in his voice. Genuine surprise. "I said I would. Words are easy. Following them is harder." He gestured north. "Come, I want to show you something." They walked in silence through terrain that grew rougher with each step. Snow gave way to rocky outcroppings, Wind howled through narrow passages. Catherine struggled to keep pace. Nokoni moved like he was born to this landscape, while she stumbled and slipped, but he never left her behind. Whenever she fell too far back, he stopped and waited, patient as stone. Finally, they reached a place where the ground opened into a small valley, sheltered from wind by rock walls on 3 sides, and in that valley, illuminated by moonlight, Catherine saw them. Dozens of snow figures, maybe hundreds, arranged in patterns that made her eyes water trying to follow them. Some tall, some small, some with arms, some without, but all of them carefully, lovingly constructed. "This is the burial ground," Nokoni said quietly, "where my people laid their honored dead before the winter came wrong and drove us south, before your people arrived and built over our memory." Catherine walked among the figures slowly, reverently. Up close she could see the detail in each one, the way hands had shaped them with care, the way positions had been chosen with purpose. "How long have you been building these?" she asked. 3 winters. I come when the snow is deep enough. I rebuild them. I bury them. I speak the words our elders taught me so the spirits know they are remembered. Why didn't you tell the settlers? If they knew this was sacred ground." Nokoni laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think your people would care? They see only what they want to see. Land to claim. Resources to take. My people are ghosts to them. Less than ghosts. We're just obstacles to be removed or ignored." Catherine wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because he was right. "Then why watch the settlement at all?" she asked. "Why not just avoid us entirely?" Nokoni turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, his features were sharp and striking. High cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that held depth she was only beginning to understand. "Because of you," he said simply. Catherine's breath caught. "Me? I was here first, building the snow figures nearest the settlement's edge. And I saw you." His voice dropped lower. "I saw the way you looked at them. Not with fear, not with disgust, but with curiosity, with respect. And I thought, perhaps there is one among them who can understand. So you watched me?" "Yes." No apology in his voice, just truth. "I watched you walk among the figures. I watched you defend them to your leader. I watched you stand at your window late at night, searching the darkness like you knew I was there." He took a step closer. "I watched you live among people you don't belong with, and I wondered what you were searching for." "I'm not searching for anything," Catherine said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're a terrible liar." Despite everything, Catherine almost smiled. "Maybe I'm searching for the same thing you are, someone who understands, someone who sees." "And have you found it?" Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something dangerous, something irrevocable. "I think so," she whispered. Nokoni closed the distance between them in one smooth motion. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she could feel his warmth, smell the winter and smoke on his skin. His eyes searched her face like he was memorizing every detail. "Your people would kill you if they knew you were here," he said quietly. "I know. Mine would question my judgment for trusting you. I know that too. And still you came." "Yes. Why?" The word was almost pleading, like he needed to understand her as badly as she needed to understand him. Catherine thought about her answer carefully, about truth and honesty and the strange, terrible courage it took to speak either. "Because for 6 months I've been half alive," she finally said, "going through motions, pretending to care about a life I never wanted. And then you appeared on that ridge and you looked at me, and for the first time since my husband died, I felt seen, really seen. Not as a burden or a widow or a woman who needs protecting, but as someone who might understand something others can't." Nokoni raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face again. That same, gentle, questioning touch. "I see you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I see your strength, your intelligence, your loneliness. I see the way you stand between worlds, belonging to neither." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "And I see the way you look at me like I'm not a monster, like I'm just a man." "You are just a man," Catherine whispered. "To you, perhaps. To them," he gestured vaguely toward the distant settlement. "To them, I am enemy, savage, threat, nothing more. Then they're fools." Nokoni smiled, a real smile this time, transforming his face into something younger, warmer. "Careful, Catherine. You're starting to sound like you're choosing a side." "Maybe I am." The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Finally, Nokoni stepped back, breaking the tension. Come, there's more I want to show you. He led her deeper into the valley, to a spot where the snow had been carefully cleared away, revealing dark earth underneath. And in that earth, something gleamed in the moonlight. What is it? Catherine asked. Stones. Marking stones. Each one represents a soul buried here. He crouched down, running his fingers across the nearest stone. My grandmother, my uncle, my sister's child who died before his first winter. Catherine knelt beside him, her heart aching. I'm sorry. Don't be. Their spirits are at peace. It's the living who suffer. He looked at her. But building the snowmen, maintaining the burial ground, it helps. It keeps their memory alive. Keeps me connected to what matters. Is that why you stay? Catherine asked. Why you keep coming back even though it's dangerous? Yes, and he hesitated. Because this land is all I have left of them. If I abandon it, if I let your people erase every trace of our existence here, then they truly die. They become nothing. Just stories that fade with time. Catherine understood then, with perfect clarity. The snow figures weren't just ritual. They were resistance, an act of defiance against erasure, against being forgotten. I won't let them destroy your work, she said firmly. I'll protect it, however I can. Nokoni looked at her for a long moment. Then, why would you do that? These aren't your people. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, Catherine admitted. But I've been watching my people try to erase things that matter for months now. Watching them destroy beauty because they don't understand it. Watching them choose fear over curiosity. She met his eyes. I'm tired of being complicit in that. Even if I can't stop all of it, I can stop this. I can make sure your dead are honored. Something shifted in Nokoni's expression. Something that looked like hope mixed with disbelief. You're a strange woman, Catherine Mercer, he said quietly. You're a strange man. Nokoni, whatever your full name is. Just Nokoni. War chiefs don't need more than one name. It keeps things simple. Despite the cold and the strangeness of the situation, Catherine laughed. And Nokoni smiled again. That transformative expression that made her chest feel too full. They talked for hours that night. About his people. Her people. The land between them. About loss and survival and the small acts of courage that keep people human. About the weight of being different. Of seeing truths others refuse to acknowledge. And Catherine felt something she hadn't felt in years. Connection. Real, deep, honest connection with another human being. When dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Nokoni walked her back toward the settlement's edge. They stopped at the place where the cleared path began, and he turned to face her. Thank you, he said, for coming, for listening, for seeing. Thank you for showing me, Catherine replied, for trusting me enough to share this. Nokoni hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out something small. He held it out to her, a smooth stone, dark and polished, with a hole worn through its center. My grandmother's, he said quietly. She wore it her whole life, said it helped her see clearly in dark times. I want you to have it. Catherine took the stone with trembling fingers. It was warm from his body heat, smooth as silk. I can't take this. It's too important. That's why I'm giving it to you. His eyes held hers. Because some things are too important not to share with someone who understands their value. Catherine closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its weight in her palm. I'll keep it safe. I know you will. He touched her face one more time. Brief, gentle. Tomorrow night, same time. I have more to show you if you're willing. I'm willing. Nokoni nodded, then stepped back. Within seconds, he disappeared into the pre-dawn shadows, leaving Catherine alone with a stone in her palm and a decision taking shape in her heart. She walked back to her cabin slowly, carefully hiding the stone in her deepest pocket. The settlement was just beginning to wake, smoke rising from chimneys, voices calling morning greetings. Catherine slipped into her cabin unnoticed and closed the door behind her. She pulled out the stone and studied it in the gray morning light. It was beautiful in its simplicity, meaningful in ways she was still discovering. And as she held it, Catherine realized something profound. The snow figures had never been about threat or warning. They'd been about invitation, about seeing if anyone would notice, anyone would care, anyone would step outside their walls and their fears to understand something larger than themselves. And she had. She'd seen, she'd stepped outside, and now she stood in that liminal space between worlds, neither fully settler nor fully Nokoni's people, just herself, just Catherine, choosing her own path for the first time in her life. The weight of that choice should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like freedom. That night, when she returned to meet Nokoni again, she brought something of her own, a small book, the only thing she'd salvaged from her previous life, poems her mother used to read to her. "For you," she said, holding it out. "Since you gave me something that matters, I wanted to do the same." Nokoni took the book carefully, handling it like precious cargo. He opened it, eyes scanning the words, even though Catherine wasn't sure he could read them in the darkness. "Words your people have kept," he said softly. "Passed down, remembered. Like your snow figures," Catherine said. "Different method, same purpose, keeping memory alive." Nokoni looked at her then, and Catherine saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not just understanding or respect, something deeper, something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "You honor me," he said quietly, "more than you know." And as they walked together into the winter night surrounded by snow and stars and the ghosts of people long gone, Catherine finally understood what the buried snowmen kept. Not secrets, not threats, not warnings of violence to come. They kept memory, connection, the fragile, precious truth that people, all people, deserve to be remembered, deserve to be honored, deserve to be seen. And she, Catherine Mercer, would make sure Nokoni's people were never forgotten, that their burial ground stayed sacred, that someone spoke their names long after Nokoni himself had passed into memory. It wasn't much. In the grand scheme of history and conflict and the collision of cultures, her small acts of protection would barely register. But to Nokoni, to the spirits he honored, it was everything, and that was enough.